Hello everybody and welcome to today's My Games recruitment show, where as you can see, it's a show I know a lot of people are waiting to watch. It's how you can use commission schemes to boost your profits. And we have our very own commission scheme expert, Carl Jones, who is the founder of Konquest. Welcome, Carl. How are you today?
I'm doing great. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, fantastic. And of course, we're joined by Mike, who appears to have gone back to his teenage years in a hoodie with his little acne on his nose. How are you doing there, Big Mike?
Yeah, I got a few spots there. Don't know what's going on, really. I'm in good shape, actually. As you can probably tell, different backdrop to that. I'm in my Welsh weekender this week, so broadcasting from here. Absolutely delighted to do so, and really, really pleased to have Carl on the show. Let me tell you why. I think commission schemes are often a bit of a blunt instrument. They're either way too complex, so the people haven't got a clue what's going on, and it's like a lottery at the end of the month to see how much money they're going to get. Or they're just so simplistic and encourage the wrong kind of behavior. So they're simple to understand, but they don't really encourage the kind of behavior and outcome that you're looking for. And I think a commission scheme can do both of those. And I thought, well, I know a thing or two about commission schemes, but not as much as Carl. So that's why we wanted him on the show. Now, Carl, just before we kick off, just a couple of sentences on Konquest, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So Konquest is the first and only commission management platform for recruiter commissions. So it's a software platform, but by virtue of having that tooling which automates the process and gamifies it and all that type of thing, all I do is work on commission, and I build up a bit of knowledge. And so people often are asking me questions, and I'm obviously happy to help share my learnings.
Hence why you're on the show. And don't forget, people out there, if you're interested, if you've got questions and you'd like to know what Carl thinks, then please just put them in the chat, and Kirsty will pick them up. It's not the chat, it's the comments, isn't it? It's actually called comments.
It's comments. You're in a webinar in your head, aren't you?
There's a webinar mode there for a minute. Yeah, sorry, everyone.
So, moving on swiftly from the old man, let's talk about pillars, because Carl, you know we're a big fan of pillars here at Flair, and you spoke earlier when we were talking before we went live that there are 4 pillars to a commission scheme. Can you just quickly run through what those 4 pillars are, please?
Yeah, sure. So when we're reviewing or considering building up new schemes, we do take this 4-pillar approach. The first and foremost, though, what I would say is that it's all about the rules that are in your business and the desired behaviors for each one of those rules. And you really want then a distinct rewards program for each one of those rules. Once you've got that set, though, aligned to your strategy, then what we look at is, firstly, we look at structure.
Before we dive in, can I just unpack that a little bit? Because that's kind of a really important point there that you just made, right? Just wind back a second. So what you're saying is that one size does not necessarily have to fit all when it comes to commission schemes. That's the first thing. Okay, that's the first thing. And secondly, I know a little later we're going to talk about the difference between 360 schemes and layered schemes. Mm-hmm. In a layered scheme, clearly you want different things from different people, and therefore want to be paid in different ways, commission-wise. So that would what you've just said would support that layered approach in terms of remuneration, is that you have a scheme which suits the job that you're doing. Have I understood what you've just said correctly?
Yeah, you have. So you want to start with the business strategy, of course, right? Every decision that we're making in our business, it stems from the strategy at the top. Well, the next step down from your strategy is saying, okay, which rules are going to be involved in delivering this strategy? And it may be that you've got 360, obviously increasingly rare, I would say, these days. Or you might have a delivery model or a 180 model or what you refer to as a layered model. So you need to have that first before you can then decide how you're going to incentivize those people. And a big mistake, or one of the biggest mistakes that I observe, is people who come to me and they'll say, Carl, haven't reviewed or changed our commission structure in 15 years. And I just, right, okay, has anything changed in the world in 15 years? Has anything changed in your business? Or a few years ago, we moved from 360 to retained.
Like everything.
Yeah, you need to review this. I always start with you start with your strategy. That should then define what the rules in your business are going to be. Then look at the responsibility of each of those rules and incentivize them independently. What you do thereafter is consistent, which is you start with structure. When we're talking about structure, we're talking about, for instance, what we call your accumulation period, which is how long is my scheme going to run over? Am I running something annually? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly?
Are you talking about payment cycles there? The commission would be paid monthly, quarterly, annually, or whatever. Is that what you're talking about there?
Well, Yeah, there can be, but what I'm talking about is that so if you ask me the most effective structure, it's what I would call a banded structure or a tiered structure, where the more that you perform, the higher rate of pay that you receive, right? So
accelerators of sorts.
Yeah, it could be called an accelerator as well. But the time you have over which to accumulate is your accumulation period. So you may have, for instance, I know, Mike, you'd mentioned search as a good example of this. So you really have, when you're considering your accumulation period, you should be looking at where you are on the spectrum of deal volume. That's the most important thing to consider. So if you're a search firm and you may only do 1 or 2 placements in a year, there's no use whatsoever in having a monthly accumulation period, because nobody's ever going to climb.
Or even a quarterly one, to be honest. What's the point?
Or maybe even a quarterly, but you should be dynamic based on the specifics of your business. Now, conversely, the opposite end of the spectrum would be high volume temp or just a high volume perm market, where people are doing multiple deals in a single month. You want a monthly scheme there, and you want to allow people to accumulate over a month. You may choose to then layer a quarterly accelerator over that to ensure consistency and to ensure that people aren't just having one blinded month and getting paid at the higher rate of pay. So these are all the considerations that you have when you're first starting, which is what structure is appropriate for the roles that I have in my business and the way that I'm trying to drive my strategy here. So that's the first thing, structure. The second, I can't remember which order we did them. Actually, there you go, payment timing. So this ties in. Payment timing is effectively how quick are you rewarded, how quickly are you paid for your rewardable action. And I talk about, and I've written about, the immediacy of reward. This is a principle, a motivational principle. It's very powerful. There has been some really interesting studies that have been completed on this. And effectively what the principle is saying is that the speed of the reward is more important than the size of the reward. Now, you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not going to take, a grand day over a grand tomorrow. But the principle is still strong. And there are a lot of recruiters that are just paying too slow, simply paying too slow. Now, there is also only so fast that you can move here.
Sorry, can I just go back on that? When you say paying too slow, you mean the commissioners takes too long to calculate, or it's over too long a period, or they haven't paid it quickly enough, or
it's just the rule of actually when I perform an action that should be rewarded today, how long is it before I receive that payment myself?
So it's like if I did a great deal in January and I'm not getting paid till December, that's going to be too long.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Yeah, just I like extremes. Okay, fair enough.
That would be really bad. But there's only so far you can go here. Obviously, we run payroll once a month in the UK, in Europe. You obviously want to get your invoices out. You preferably want to get them paid in many cases. So you can only move so fast here. I advocate 1 month in arrears, and that would be in arrears of starters or timesheet date in the contract period. So enough time that you can get your invoices out, get everything organised. If it's going
to be clear on that, then, so the work I do in January, I get paid for in March. Is that what you're saying, or in February?
So if you take a really simple example, perm, let's just say a perm market, I have starters that have started this week in April. I should be getting paid on them at the end of May.
End of May, right.
1 month in arrears of the start of the invoice date. Yeah, that's optimal. There are some cases where that's not appropriate. Some companies are hyper focused on cash flow, and maybe they have long payment terms in their industry that they're in, and so they don't want to have that negative cash flow momentum build in their business. In that case, something like a pay when paid payment methodology may be appropriate, or maybe going to 2 months in arrears. So it is completely unique to every business, but just generally speaking, when someone achieves a rewardable action as defined by you, try and reward them as quickly as you can. That's going to have a heavy impact on the overall motivational performance of your setup. Well,
again, going back to search, some of the senior, about a quarter of my clients are search companies, which is why I'm interested. Right. They don't often get coverage. In a search firm, some of these senior people can be on 3, maybe even longer months' notice. So if you want to pay as soon as the deal is done, there's 3 months where that person can change their mind, and then you've got to have a clawback to get the money back. And as you say, there are cash flow influences on that. So for those kind of things, in your opinion, would it be easier for those bigger deals to pay as soon as someone actually starts, or to pay when the first or the last payment is made by the client? What would you think?
So firstly, when I say 1 month in arrears, I'm talking about 1 month in arrears of the invoice date, really the start date. If I do a deal now and they have a 3-month notice period, I shouldn't be getting paid next month. You have to meet the deal actually completes. In terms of pay when paid, we could talk a long time just about that. And I've wrote quite the handbook of recruiters commission that I referred to earlier, Mike, which your listeners can have. It's free, so if any of them want to have a copy of that,
just on that, so Carl's produced a handbook which he sent to me, and I really like it, and it's like an A to Z of commission, really, or a dummy's guide to commission plus. If people want that, they just connect with you and ask for it, and they get it. There's no strings attached to that or anything. You just send it to them.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone that wants it, just connect, message. I'll send it across.
Well worth getting. I've got it. It's well worth getting, actually. So
I'm pleased that you think so. And a lot of what I'm saying now is just written in there anyway.
Let's just end the interview now and just get the book and call it quits.
No, what we will do though, I think, is probably move on to the third of the pillars, which is thresholds.
So controversial, isn't it? Controversial. I've observed a very clear trend over the last few years on thresholds. But let's define what a threshold is first, because I think there's some misunderstanding there.
Because Kirsty doesn't know. Is that what you're saying?
I obviously know, but there are some people who don't.
Let me define it for you. So when I'm talking about a threshold, what I'm talking about is the minimum level of performance required to be rewarded at all. That's what we're talking about here. So the most common type of threshold is a fixed threshold, which is just an amount. In the UK, that's somewhere around 5k a month. Obviously, as inflation and higher desk costs come in, you start to see those numbers creep up a little bit. But effectively, a threshold is saying until you have reached this level of performance, you don't qualify for our rewards program. And the controversy is very simple, and it does tend to be binary. Should you have a threshold or should you not? And it is split. However, the trend that I've observed over the last few years, so I did a talk in Ibiza 3 or 4 years ago, at which point the data that we had.
Get you. Oh.
Well, got to drop.
He wasn't asked to. He was in the bar, and he said, "Stand aside, everybody. I've got to talk about commission." And they're all like, "What's that?"
That's weekly. I do that every week. This was a special occasion on a stage. I was very humbled to be there. Anyway, at that point in time, it was about 50-50. So 50% of the industry had them, 50% didn't. That is definitely skewed.
Could people just put in the comments, if you don't mind, just put in the comments now whether you're pro or against having the threshold. Just be interested to see what you think.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what the audience has as well. My observations and the data that we collect on this says that fewer and fewer people are employing a threshold, and people are actually peeling them back. There's a number of reasons for that. Over the last couple of years, there's obviously the battle for talent has been red hot as recruiters have been, growing like mad, and salespeople don't like thresholds. You just got to accept that is, I'm happy to hear an alternative opinion, but being a sales guy for a couple of decades, like given the choice between a threshold and not having one, I'll do without, thank you. So that's one point. The second point is just to do with the nature of management today. And I've had a number of really interesting conversations with people recently, one of which is Brett Stevens from STR Group. So fantastic business, has grown very well, over 100 recruiters. Brett recently led an MBO, and one of the things that he did at the back end of last year was to remove thresholds altogether from all of the schemes in his business. And I had a really good chat with him about that. And what he was effectively saying to me was, Carl, I don't think that threshold is the best tool for managing performance. We have other tools for managing that.
See, I've got to say, I happen to agree with that. I don't believe in thresholds, because if you have to manage a performance or incentivize someone to work hard enough to place, basically a threshold normally covers costs pretty much. Mm-hmm. Then I don't think your management skills are probably, as attuned as they should be. If you've got somebody that's consistently delivering below that imaginary threshold, even if it's not real, you need to do something about it. Either you need to train them, coach them, look at where they're placing people, trying to figure out the problem and fix it. You ain't gonna cure it by saying to someone, "Well, you're going to get paid if you don't do that." That's not curing the problem at all. So personally, I don't believe in thresholds and never have.
I mean, that fits with the narrative that I'm hearing right now. Of course, there are some circumstances where a threshold is appropriate, and business owners have the flexibility to make this decision, but it should be an informed decision. And as I say, as time goes on, thresholds are not as popular as they used to be. I will just throw in this little trick. which is something that I'm a big advocate of. So we talked about having maybe layering accumulation periods and having multiple schemes. One of the ways that you can take advantage of advertising that you don't have a threshold whilst really having one and protecting yourself from overpayment of underperformance is to have no threshold in a monthly commission scheme. So you've got a normal monthly commission scheme. It has tiers, no threshold. You get paid on every penny that you bill, but overlay that with a quarterly accelerator or a kicker that does have a threshold. And that might be quarterly target, for instance, might be the minimum.
I think that's fine. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think it's very powerful. I've seen it deployed a number of times. I'm definitely a big advocate of it. I think it solves a few problems. You can say we don't have a threshold, we pay on every penny. You're still protected. You're incentivizing the right behaviors, which for most people is consistent performance over the longer term, not individual, lumpy months. And it also helps to smooth out your cash flow as well. So free tip there.
I like it. It's sort of like a hybrid model, and I'm a big fan of a hybrid. So let's look at the fourth one, because in a second we are going to look at kind of what the most popular schemes are in a second. So let's just round off these 4 pillars. And the fourth one is payout rates. Can you just explain to us briefly what that means?
Yeah, of course. So once you've identified all of the other things that we've said, you saw what are our rules, what's the right structure to reward them, how quickly are we going to reward them, should we have a threshold? It's actually the last question that you need to be asking yourself, which is how much are we going to pay? Too many people start there. And as I've already explained, I think that there's a smarter way to approach this, but you do need to decide how much you're going to pay. Again, very, very personal thing to each business, the business owner's priorities, how many shareholders are involved, what's the growth strategy, is it a lifestyle business? There's a lot of things that can go in here. I will give you just a rough guesstimate as like what is competitive. And if you ask any rec to rec, all of those guys, they're going to say, well, consultants are expecting to take home about a third. That's what they're expecting to take home. Now, the reason why I can't be explicit about this is there's too many factors involved. How much should you be paying a top performer versus an underperformer? They should not be the same.
Let me be very clear then on that then, just to be clear, because this is the question I get asked all the time. When you say take home, you don't mean post-tax. This is pre-tax, isn't it? So they're gross, yeah. So they bill £100,000. They get £33,000
salary and commission. Yeah,
salary and commission, but it doesn't include the other direct costs. Is that right? So licenses, national insurance, pension contributions, car allowance, whatever direct costs associated with that particular consultant. Are you saying that's not included in the 33%?
Yes, I am. Yeah, it's a bit of a blunt tool, but I think that it's been designed that way to help communicate to consultants, like this is what you should be expecting. But the truth of the matter is many consultants take home more than that, but they typically are the top performers. They're outperforming target, and therefore they're enjoying a higher rate of pay. And conversely, if you're an underperformer, we typically if you imagine like a distribution, for instance, who gets paid here, you take a typical bell curve of a distribution model. That's not really desirable here, because the people that are performing at the highest, we want to reward those at the higher rate, and the people that are underperforming and they might be in some sort of management process, we want to pay them at a lower rate, because there's less profit or even cost for the business there. So the distribution isn't standardized there, and you do want to make sure that you have things balanced in the way that your top performers are the ones we're focused on. They're going to get the greatest share, but I still need to be competitive across the cycle to make sure that I can hire and retain staff, generally speaking.
I would add something else.
Last point, Mike, and then we have to move on. So last point.
Yeah, okay. I'd add something else to this, which I think is an important point, is that if you're looking for blunt instruments in scalability, so you want to grow your business and scale it up, one of the blunt instruments is to keep a stable team. Even if that team is average, you'll make more money off them than if you've got a bunch of stars coming in and going, and then the duffer coming in and going, and you've got this nobody ever gets to that state where they're maximum productivity. So even if you're overpaying on what, say, the industry says, but you're keeping a stable team, you will do better from that in the long term. You will make more money because of that, even though you're paying out more money per person per month, if that makes sense. Because every time someone leaves, that's going to cost you dough, basically. So, and if you saw the show that we had a couple of shows ago with Matt Ellis, and he trebled his profits. And one of the ways that he did that, he switched over to a layered model away from 360s. But the other thing he did is he built a stable team. his team, he lost one of his 42 people in 1 year, right? And that stability just pushes your profitability into the next zone. So don't focus, I suppose my message is, on just, oh, well, I'm paying 40% of gross out. You know, that seems like a lot. Yeah. But if you've got a really stable team, it's not a lot. It's a good deal.
Okay. All right. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to sort of talk on some example commission schemes, because we have all sorts of people watching, whether they're perm, whether they're contract, whether they're search, whether they're 360, whether they're layered. So can we have a little bit of a discussion about what commission schemes are popular, probably within those brackets, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so a lot to get into 5 minutes. I'll try my best. So I think, as I've already explained, I'm an advocate, and it's extremely popular that you have this kind of banded or tiered approach to commission. You need to decide over what period that should be, and that's going to be driven by your deal volumes. Low volumes, you're going to do it over a longer period of time. High volumes, you're going to do it over.
To make it simple for you, Carl, if we said, let's talk about a scheme that pays something every month and maybe something every quarter. So let's just think about something along those lines.
So on your monthly basis, let's just assume that this is perm to make it simple. The actual bands themselves from 0 to 10 or 0 to 15, you want to align those with your average deal size. So again, flexible to any business. If your average deal size is about $5,000, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. If it's 10, do it the other way. No threshold. Then if you want to layer a quarterly accelerator on top of that, I would be suggesting that the initial threshold to cover would be target or something in that sort of realm. So what you're doing there is you're incentivizing people to do as much as they can in the month, but with an eye on the quarter. So you've got consistent performance, and they're only going to qualify for that if they're on target year to date at that point over that quarter. That's a really successful scheme that I've seen multiple times. We've implemented.
It does reduce the chances of sandbagging as well, doesn't it? A little bit,
yeah,
if it's on a quarterly basis. Yeah.
Exactly that, and that is one of the drawbacks of a monthly scheme. You do get this lumpiness, and it's lumpiness for the consultant, for you, for cash flow, and you do get sandbagging as a result of that. So we're trying to remove those problems, have more consistency over time, whilst also retaining these key motivational factors, which is after each deal, there should be a good incentive to do another one. Well, the next one, I'm getting 5% more. The next one after that, I'm getting 5% more, so on and so forth, and then reward them quickly.
Would you pay if say you're going to have accelerators? So the first 10 grand is X, and then the next 10 grand is X plus Y, and then so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Would you pay that inflated percentage just on that layer, not the whole thing? Just no. Okay.
That gets very problematic.
I thought that out.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
could ask a question around the difference between individual bonuses and team bonuses, because what I often see is that a very heavily individualized commission scheme makes people a bit selfish sometimes. But it comes down to the individual's character, because some people are very generous regardless of what their scheme is. But sometimes it comes down to that. Well, that was my candidate. I got that candidate because, whatever arguments around it, because they want to get their commission scheme, versus putting something in place that encourages more of a team spirit, which again is about their bottom line. It's about what they get in their pockets, but it's about helping each other on a day-to-day basis to hit those targets and get them across. How can you use, what kind of commission scheme do you think you can put together to encourage personal achievement, but also team contribution?
Yeah, good question, Mike. So I am a believer in individual reward programs per role, as I've already mentioned. I think that we're basically ticking that box for the individual side. On the team side of things, what you increasingly see is team-based incentives, and these can be financial or otherwise. If they're financial, it would typically be like a bonus pot sort of methodology there, as opposed to a percentage commission on an individual basis. But what I most often see is company trips, lunch clubs, team building incentives, and all of these type of things. Company trips in particular, you might have that twice a year. The company needs to hit its target collectively, and then everyone can go on that type of incentive. It seems to work quite well. I'm sure there's other ideas as well.
I had someone work for me many years ago, and she said to me, we're having this discussion, and we used to do a lot of social things, and she said, I can't do the accent, she was a Brummie, but she said, I can't pay my mortgage on nights out, or words to that effect. And I think a lot of people, it just come down to the cash, doesn't it? They don't want all that other stuff, just give me the money. So do you think, I think one size fits all makes sense. You wouldn't have I'm about to say individual group schemes, but it's like, that's what we pay individuals and that's what we pay the group. But I think you have to be mindful of what turns the group on a little bit, don't you, I think?
Yeah, you do. And obviously the holy grail of incentives is personalized incentives. I think there's just limitations in reality, how far you can go there. But there's also the cultural impact. And each business is going to have a slightly different culture, and they're going to try to bring people into the flock who align with that culture. And if you have maybe a slightly younger demographic and it's mainly single people and they like a holiday, a company trip's probably going to work really well.
Yeah.
You know, so there is
something to be said for that, isn't it?
required there.
I know Kirsty's keen to get on. I know
We've
that.
got one last question, Mike, and then we're rounding up. So make this a good one.
Okay, yeah. It's a very specific one, again, that I get asked quite a lot. Is that okay with consultants? It's a percentage of GP or contribution, right? Fair enough. But with resources, finders or qualifiers, people that just find candidates and pass them on, it's normally a fixed amount in pound notes. Okay, what's your view on that?
Well, you know, if it is horses for courses here. And there is an appropriate, so there's been a bit of a shift, hasn't there, over the last decade or so, where resources were a thing in the past more so than today. And now we have like this delivery consultant sort of concept. With the delivery consultant roles that we see, at least, we call it a contribution model or a splits-based model. That might be the layered model that you're referring to, Mike. And I tend to think that works best. So effectively, all you're doing is for every pound of revenue that's generated, what is the weighting that will be aligned to each role that's contributed? And it might be 50-50. If it's a 180 model, that could be split 3 ways, and delivery might get 20% of the deal value, for example. And I've seen that work very well in other marketplaces where the role of the resourcer literally is maybe a lower skilled role with fewer targets. Then that might be where you get 100 quid per candidate placed, or a couple of hundred quid, or whatever. But certainly in my experience, it's leaning much further towards the contribution-based model, where everyone's on the same scheme, but it's the amount that they get into that.
I'm a big fan of contribution. I was rewarded on contribution back in the 80s, actually. So very big fan of that, actually.
Me too.
Okay, fantastic. So unfortunately, we're running out of time, Carl. I could listen to you speak all day, but we will come back to you in a second for your top tips. So anybody who's thinking about changing their commission scheme, you've got a tip for them, which we will come to in a second. But first, Mike, can we talk about who we've got next week? Because I believe it's me.
Very special guest. It's me, actually. No. So yeah, this I can't stress this enough. Don't just gloss over this one because it's not practical. If you want to grow a scalable business to achieve whatever you want to achieve with it, the very first thing you need to do as the leader is get a scalability mindset. I can't tell you how important it is. And it's the thing that I'm most proud of when I work with people, is to change their mentality from being basically a recruiter who owns a business to a business owner that just happens to run a recruitment company. There is a world of difference between those two. And if you make changes to your business, but you don't have a scalability mindset, those changes are more likely going to fail. So we are going to go through what that mindset actually is, and why most leaders don't actually have it, which is true. So it's going to be great. Good, looking forward to it.
It'll be interesting. It's going to be a great show next week. Okay, so Carl, people are watching this. They're thinking, my commission scheme may not be what I want. What would you suggest to them?
Well, I mean, first things first, you've got to be reviewing your setup at least semi-regularly. So many people, I've heard people come and say, Carl, I haven't reviewed my commission scheme in 10 years. That's crazy. I think that it should be at least reviewed once in a while. Get the handbook from me, read some of the stuff we've got. It'll give you the guidance that you need to do a good job on there. But my top tip that I'm going to give is just one that's completely neglected. Commission is your biggest incentive. It's your most expensive incentive. It's the industry's biggest incentive. And yet it's hidden away. It's on a spreadsheet somewhere, and that's fine. But I would encourage everyone to get your incentive as visible as possible in front of people, so they can see exactly where they are, how close they are to the next milestone, what they're going to get paid into the future, not just in 2 days' time, and just make sure that you're treating this incentive for the importance that it should really have. Get it visible.
Okay, now we have just had one comment before we end, and I want to just ask it quickly. So Paul said, how do you see the bonus commission market for executive search, not recruitment, proper retained executive search consultants? They typically pay a percentage of salary for a delivery and a percentage of revenue for sales managers. So what would you say to Paul?
I've spoken to Paul once before, I believe, in the past. So good to see you, Paul. Everything that I've said still applies. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, which end of the industry you're in. I would go through exactly the same approach. You have all of the tools available to you. Get your structure right. Make sure that you pay in quickly once the job is actually done, and agree or decide on a payout rate which is comfortable within the parameters that you're operating. But a bit of a difficult one to go into any depth with only a couple of seconds.
Just looking at that there, that what Paul's put on there, it looks like it seems to me, if I'm reading that correctly, and I might not be, that is kind of layered. Is that there is a delivery consultant that's getting something, and an engagement manager, which is like front end, perhaps client facing, and they need to get a percentage as well, possibly for sales managers as a third group. So it's very much layered. I would think that's right. How I'm reading that, I don't know, but maybe if you get a chance, you could put a more kind of detailed answer in the comments for Paul. Maybe if you get a chance later, Carl.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, and that was something I was going to say. So obviously, Carl, you've mentioned that you have the handbook for people, and if anybody's watching the recorded version of this, is the best thing for them to do to just connect with you on LinkedIn and kind of take the conversation there? Is that something that you're okay with them doing?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'll make sure that Carl's LinkedIn is in the comments. So we have come to the end of today's show. I want to thank everybody for watching and for the comments that we've had today. I very much want to thank Carl because it's been a lot of information. Obviously, most of it I already knew, but like for everybody who didn't know, I didn't know any of it actually. So thank you very much, Carl, for coming today. And thank you to Mike as well for being here when he's on his holiday.
And I'd like to thank my spot as well. There it is, look.
Yes, okay. All right, so thank you very much, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.
See you next week, guys.
Thanks, guys.